Welcome everyone to another session of Ask Mayfield Anything. We will be getting started in just a minute or two. All right, we can get started as more people come through. So I am really excited for us to host another session of Ask Mayfield Anything this June. Happy summer, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about data-driven risk mitigation. It's going to be a roundtable conversation with several speakers, and you are going to be able to ask questions to them from the audience. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat, but preferably the Q&A box, and we will be answering those questions later on in the conversation. So we can get started. So I'm Christy Drutman. I'm the content marketing coordinator here at Mayfield Renewables. So I'll be moderating the conversation and leading the Q&A. We also have David Brearley from our team, who's the senior project manager of technical services here at Mayfield. And we have Ryan Mayfield, who is our founder and CEO. So we are all going to be collectively presenting and moderating today's conversation along with our expert guests. So now I'll get to introducing our expert guest today. So we first have Cherif Kedir. So Cherif is the CEO and president of RETC, a leading independent test lab for photovoltaic products and batteries based in Fremont, California. As a solar industry veteran of 15 years, Cherif is the go-to expert on product development, product engineering, yield enhancement, performance enhancement, test site development, reliability and durability testing, bankability, and certification testing. Before RETC, Cherif held an extensive 11-year background in semiconductors, working on product engineering, testing, and failure analysis. Thank you so much, Cherif, for joining us today. And our next speaker is Frédéric Dross. Frédéric is the Vice President of Strategic Development at STS. He received his PhD in semiconductor device physics from Telecom Paris Tech in Paris, France. Frédéric has been working in photovoltaics since 2004. And since June 2020, Frédéric has been the Vice President of Strategic Development for STS, the global market leader in PV module inspection. Frédéric has also authored more than 80 scientific peer-reviewed international papers, 6 technology white papers, and 8 patents. Quite a resume, love that. And then we have Danny Seagraves. Danny Seagraves is a risk management and risk finance specialist working for Willis Towers Watson, who specializes in developing insurance-backed solutions that provide purchasers with a positive return on investment. Since 1988, Danny has delivered unique and customized risk management and risk finance solutions for his clients, empowering them to achieve optimum balance sheet protection while maximizing the risk-adjusted returns. Danny has earned a reputation of serving his clients from an enterprise risk management perspective. Because of the breadth of his experiences and his ability to critically analyze situations from multiple perspectives, Danny is a critical member of his clients' strategic planning teams. So we have clearly a really wide range of expertise in the room today to discuss this complex topic. And so I'll have David Brearley from our team introduce today's subject matter.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Yeah, and conceptually, this roundtable discussion features three domain experts who represent three distinct pillars of a data-driven approach to risk mitigation for large-scale solar assets. So namely, beyond qualification testing, pre-shipment factory inspection, and location and technology-specific risk financing. And when you read the 2021 PV module index report, which Cherif will talk to directly. See, these are interconnected and synergistic disciplines. So accelerated lifetime tests like RETC's threshold test is the best known indicator of solar PV module durability. At the same time, these factory test efforts are only worthwhile if the bill of material is controlled during manufacturing. And that's typically accomplished using an accredited inspection body such as STS. And then what's interesting is that those lot specific and the BOM control are what allow solar asset insurance specialists like Willis Towers Watson to develop technology and location specific risk profiles that deliver long-term cost savings. And effectively, risk mitigation is not a single act of due diligence, but rather is an interconnected ecosystem. And these three companies all play an essential role in de-risking large-scale solar assets. And without more renewable power generation, we cannot mitigate the risks associated with climate change and increasingly severe weather, which is ironically a major risk for solar assets. So the roundtable panelists can speak not only to these different risk profiles, but also offer solutions for mitigating project risks.
Awesome. And now we're going to have Cherif go over the PVMI report, which he'll go into detail about. So Cherif, you can take the floor now.
Thank you, Christy and David, for the introduction. Yeah, so just a little bit about RETC. We've been around for 12 years. In fact, we celebrate our 12th year anniversary in about 1 week exactly. So we started out initially in 2009 to help small manufacturers and R&D centers here in the Bay Area in California with their certification quest, and also working with the downstream industry, primarily developers and financial institutions, to weed out the products that were not or would not perform as well as expected. So the threshold test was born in 2010, and we did various presentations at various conferences back then, and the rest is history, as I say. So essentially, we focus on bankability testing, on certification testing of all the PV materials and related materials as well, balance of systems, as well as energy storage and battery testing in recent years. Of course, you can download the PVMI, which aggregates all these results from our website at retc-ca.com. Now, on the PVMI, essentially the PVMI, which was born a few years ago, it just collects and rates module manufacturers specifically based on products tested, and differently than what other indices may report in the industry. We focus not just on the product performance, but we actually include other indicators, such as the manufacturer's ability to deal with issues, as well as their quality systems, and their performance ranking as well. So we're looking beyond just reliability. So on to the next slide. So, and that's how we came up with the concept of the PV module index. It essentially looks at the intersection of the reliability indicators, which is how well module manufacturers or products specifically do under a gamut of very high stress test conditions, which cover humidity freeze, damp heat, thermal cycling, the static mechanical load followed by DML, TC, and HF, as well as other reliability stresses. We look at performance indicators, how efficient those products are and how efficient they continue to be over the life of the product and over the stress period, as well as quality indicators, which indicates how likely the module manufacturers are to continue to create products that are of high quality, high performance, and high reliability beyond the testing that we perform. And this is something that is really critical for the industry, because everybody can produce 20, 30, 50 modules for testing that are that will do fairly well. But it's really, really difficult to ensure that the module manufacturers are going to continuously produce that high quality. And that's why we have experts in this, in this topic in today's webinar, from STS. Next slide. So on to some of the results of the testing and what we published in this year's PVMI. So just speaking of a few key tests, the mechanical sequence, which is static mechanical load followed by a dynamic mechanical load, and then followed by thermally cycling the modules for 50 cycles, and then 30 humidity-free cycles. This is one of the most stressful tests, and it really highlights a lot of the design flaws that can be present in modules out there, especially as these technologies are evolving to meet the downstream demands of high performance and low cost. So some of the things, for instance, as module manufacturers reduce frame profiles to minimize the shading on the backside of the modules, and as well as reducing the cost of the frames, we start seeing failures not only on the frames themselves, but also on the modules, on the cells, as the modules start to bend and torsion in the testing. But that said, more than 17% of the modules that we tested did better than 1% degradation. This is a pretty high standard to achieve. I mean, we're not trying to set a low bar here, but on the same hand, at the same time, more than 10% of the module manufacturers degraded more than 4.5%. For the majority of our downstream partners, they consider more than 3% a red flag, and so a lot of the module manufacturers are doing well, and a lot of the products are rising to the top, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in some of the modules being introduced in the industry. Potential induced degradation, which was a really hot topic maybe some 10 years ago, and maybe 5 years ago, was for the most part resolved. We still see some issues there, maybe 17% roughly doing really well, less than 1%. But more than 10%, again, very similar to the DML sequence or the mechanical stress sequence, are still showing degradations higher than 4.5%. And we see some, of course, that are much, much higher. I mean, there's a small percentage of modules that outright fail, sometimes 10, 20% degradations. And this is something that we haven't seen in many years, maybe 2 or 3 years, but in recent months, we started seeing an increase in high degradations on potential induced degradation. And, primarily as module manufacturers try to push the limits and boundaries of cell technologies, and partly also was due to the tightening of the supply chain in recent years, as module manufacturers tried to use cells which they normally would not have used, but trying to fill their obligations to manufacturers. Just really quickly, we just in terms of scale of the data that was used to generate a lot of these metrics, we tested roughly, actually more than 300 different products. So there is a huge number of modules that we tested over the past year, or for the 1 year. And we're highlighting the few that rose to the top. So nearly about 35% of the modules, moving on, to additional data, about 35% of the modules that we tested in damp heat did exceptionally well, less than 2% degradation, and that's after 2,000 hours of damp heat. Certification requires only 1,000 hours, so most of the modules that are introduced in the field are only subjected to 1,000 hours of damp heat, and we extend that to 2,000 hours, and they're still doing really well. When it comes to thermal cycling, still, probably a much higher number of modules are actually passing. Thermal cycling seems to be an issue that has been resolved by the module manufacturers, and primarily that has been resolved by the introduction of thinner ribbons and multi-bus bars, which reduces the amount of stress on the cells in in the chamber, the thermal cycling chambers. This is the data that actually drove the high achievers. So on the module efficiency front, you can see the top 10 products that made it to the top, and these are modules that measure more than 20% efficiency. One of the things that was highlighted in about 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago at SNEC, as module manufacturers introduced really high power products, variants, and still to this day, as the module power increases, the efficiency is not necessarily increasing. As many technical people out there and can attest to, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, module power tracked almost very well with module efficiency. So the improvements in the power output of a module were primarily achieved by increasing the efficiency of the cells. And in recent years, as the cell efficiency started to get very close to its theoretical limit, module manufacturers had to resort to different ways of achieving those high power outputs. If you just look at, for instance, a 450 watt module product, and then a module manufacturer introducing an 800 watt variant, that's a 78% increase in power. You don't achieve that just like that. So what is happening is cells are getting bigger, modules are getting bigger, and that essentially introduces some issues and some risks as those modules are deployed. On the
Cherif,
testing, sorry.
This is Danny with Willis Harris Watson. A question for you. What I'm hearing is a lot of technology advancement. It sounds like it is. I often describe our industry as a technology industry more than an energy industry. We just happen to do stuff with electrons. I'm trying to marry this with an insurance industry, which is historically just lethargic. And to me, how do you fill that void between established testing criteria and new technology? There seems to be a conflict there.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good question, Danny. And to be honest with you, some of these tests that we come up with are well thought out, and we look at a technology. For instance, we would get a submission and we do a construction evaluation on a product, and some warning signs may just pop up from the construction evaluation. For instance, just looking at the profile of a frame, or the thickness of the glass used in a module, or the thickness of the frame itself. These things bring up to view a lot of the risks that we anticipate, and we would naturally try to subject those modules to certain tests that we normally may not have focused on. So for instance, in the thresher test, when we first created it in 2009, we did not focus on the mechanical stresses. There was a dynamic mechanical load component, but that's only 1,000 Pascal, right? Cycling for 1,000 cycles. But the static mechanical load became a major issue with the advent of bifacial technologies. Right. And so that's something that we had to actively add to our sequences. But on the other hand, about 3 or 4 years ago, when we introduced the bifacial ranking, and this is an effort that we did jointly with Black & Veatch and Ralph Romero, and it was a lot of learning from that quest. What we found out is, as we started doing the testing, a lot of the issues started popping up even without us looking into them. So for instance, the shading issues when we installed the modules, and so some of the issues that show up in our testing, we try to incorporate those findings into the test protocol and the test program, so that new products actually undergo the same testing and get screened for those potential issues.
Do you find a correlation between the testing and the testing protocols you guys develop and what's ultimately adopted by UL, IEEE, and the other organizations setting standards?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so there are many correlations. I mean, sometimes we actively push for certain tests to be included in the standards. And that's just because if we see that it's a high risk, we will push. We work with the standards committee. Zen Villanueva, who's our VP of quality, is very active in the compliance arena, and she's in a lot of those committees and subcommittees. On the other hand, there are certain things that correlate, surprisingly, with field issues. So we've had some massive critical failures in our testing from certain products, for instance, in the past. And before we could even wrap up the project, we were contacted by developers who were seeing failures in the field on the same product that were identical to what we were seeing in the field, in the lab. So, and sometimes a lot of what we do correlates sometimes with actual field issues, and that's really the holy grail. I mean, ideally, everything that we do in the lab should either correlate with issues that will eventually happen, and ideally, they should, the correlation should be somehow designed to cover the life of the project, 25, 30, 35 years in the field, or it should have a safety margin to ensure that certain problems just don't show up in the field. I mean, when you talk about hotspots or risk of fire on someone's roof, you just don't want that to ever happen. So there are certain safety factors that cover beyond what you can see in the field.
Right.
Yeah. And so the last part that we're noting here in the performance section is the pan file, and we do a lot of these projects essentially assessing the performance, real life performance of products under different irradiance levels and different temperatures, assessing, measuring the temperature coefficient, the incident angle modifier, NOCT, performance at NOCT. So we do a variety of different tests to fully characterize and understand how a module is going to be behaving and producing energy in the field under different field conditions. And we use that data to create pan files. Then we use those pan files to rate and gauge different products under simulated power plant setups, and that's how we come up with the ranking there. And the cutoff there is about 85% performance ratio, and if anything below, then that doesn't make it to the top. Okay.
Hey, Cherif, while we're on pan files, a question actually came in from the audience and asking if Cherif and Frédéric could discuss trends and risks that you're seeing with OEM versus third-party sourced module pan files. Is that something you can talk to?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we started and maybe I'll just use this as an example really quickly, but we started the pan file, quest in 2010, early 2010. And that started out as a legal issue where the developer was gearing up to sue the module manufacturer because of inflated pan files. And so they engaged our services to be the referee between the two, and we generated pan files. And when they simulated the energy output of our pan file, it came in within 0.2% of the actual performance measured in the field after 1 year. And so it was extremely accurate, and we've done this many, many times. Usually our pan files come within 0.2 to 0.5%. When instrumentation is accurate in the field, right? That's a big variable in field performance measurements. And so we realized back in 2010 that this was a major issue. What tends to happen in the industry is there is a measurement uncertainty, and there's a level of uncertainty associated with taking measurements. And there's also the flexibility of module manufacturers of picking superstar modules, right? They call them, the grade A, best modules they can produce. And so they can do everything legally. And a lot of module manufacturers, and I can tell you, the module manufacturers that we test and we work with by and far tend to be honest and actually do everything right when it comes to assessing their performance. because they have to manage and ensure their reputation is untarnished. But we see plenty of module of pan files generated by under uncontrolled settings or by module manufacturers, certain module manufacturers that are severely overrated. In some cases, even some laboratories, we've seen pan files from third-party labs that literally were better than the module manufacturer's data sheets in all aspects, in label power, in temperature coefficient, in everything. So it didn't even look like the product that was being sold. And so it's really, really important to look under the hood of those pan files, ask questions, find out how the testing was done, how the samples were picked, whether the bill of materials that went into the making of those pan files have been controlled, have been witnessed, whether there was quality audits. I mean, these are really, really important things to ask. And you just end up with pan files that are a lot more realistic and honest. And maybe a little bit more on this can come from Frédéric, because he and his team are out there, in the midst of the manufacturing lines, seeing what's being done.
Yeah, thanks, Cherif. Yeah, the pan file we do believe, and in general, all performance aspects, we do see that as a relatively high risk nowadays. You may say, okay, how do you define high risk? Well, there are actually ways, very standard ways to defining a risk. A risk may be defined as, there's a methodology which is called RPN, risk priority number, which defines a risk as the combination of 3 dimensions. The first one is just the probability that what you fear that may happen happens. The second one is the severity. When it happens, how bad is it? But there's a third aspect, and this third aspect is the detectability of the bad thing to happen. And that is for me, pan file. If you have an overestimated pan file in your pro forma, then what you may end up having is underperformance, and you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know if it's the weather, you don't know if it's the cables, the inverter. It's very hard to identify where it's coming from. So the detectability of this risk is pretty poor, and therefore the risk is relatively high. Plus, there's been flying a little bit under the radar so far. So I think that this is a risk for investors in general. The second aspect, and Cherif, you mentioned that, is the bill of material. There are many reasons why it would make the life much easier for a module manufacturer if they could have only one name of the products and have all their modules coming from only one single name, typically called product type. So there is a tendency to have many different bill of materials which are combined into this one data sheet and one product type. But the bill of materials has a huge importance. In particular for the pan file, the cell obviously has a very big importance, but not only the anti-reflective coating that you may have some impact, especially if you're including in the pan file. Usually in the pan file, the IAM is included. I mean, I'm not sure. This has been. I don't think it has been mentioned yet, but this is part of the pan file for me. And for instance, yeah, Cherif, what do you think could be, if you take two product type, two modules with the same product type, but the different bill of material, what do you think the difference in pan file can be according to your experience?
I think it really depends on the bill of materials, obviously. We've tested, in fact, there are some retest guidelines that we offer to all our customers, which are in line with the industry, which dictates when pan files need to be regenerated. And all our customers abide by that. They have to do it, and they're very, very good about it. But so, for instance, on a monofacial module, replacing the back sheet might have an impact on the reflectivity of the light that hits the backsheet. And so going from a white backsheet to another white backsheet, there could be, an impact, but usually it's minimal. And, as long as we can prove that the two backsheets are similar in performance, they may not need to perform change the pan file. But going from a white backsheet to a black backsheet, there's a net, impact, which could be substantial, and that usually triggers a retest. Of course, one of the things that module manufacturers tend to do quite a bit is changing cells, right? They can't really rely on a single cell source. And this is one of the, this is the biggest predictor of performance of a module. That's the engine of a car, right? And so different cells tend to have different performances, and not necessarily all the time, but they tend to do. And one of the tricky things is when you have 2 or 3 or 4 different cell suppliers, but yet just generate one pan file, it's always a trick, right? And so module manufacturers tend to average out the performance of the 4 different bill of materials into one pan file, and and offer it to their developers. So there are a lot of different questions that developers can, or I guess the stakeholders can ask with regards to the pan files, whether they're specific to the product that is being shipped or if it's generalized pan files. There's also the fact that some manufacturers tend to have very good control of their supply chain, and this is usually the case with some of our large customers, and they tend to ensure that the cells that they use are very well binned and characterized under different conditions, and they tend to yield very, very similar pan files. Of course, there are different things. So for instance, changing the glass thickness, changing the glass coating on the outside. This is something you have a lot of experience with, Frédéric, will have a pretty substantial impact on the reflectivity of the glass and the transmission of the glass, especially at different angles. And that will impact the performance of the product in the field. So yeah, so that's basically, there are a lot of things that that can impact the pan files and the performance of the modules, and we try to capture those in our testing.
Cherif, you piqued an interesting question in my mind. We've done a lot of work on the physical reliability of systems in different technology combinations. That's the first solar module with an ATI tracker or an extra. And there's a correlation between the levels of reliability and resiliency. So far, we've talked about module evaluation and isolation. Is there any impact of the various combinations of technology that module will be incorporated into as to how it impacts the pan files and ultimate performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that the industry realized was very interesting was in previous generation of modules, when they utilized full cells, the operating current within the module, this is just an example, the operating current within the module used to be about 9 to 11 amps, so let's say roughly about 10 amperes. And that caused some resistive losses within the module. And then the industry shifted to half cells, right? And immediately the resistive losses were cut, by the square root of the current drop, right? So they went from 10 amperes to 5 amperes. And what that did is conceptually, it's a good thing, right? You have fewer resistive losses, but what happens, the counterintuitive issue there is the modules are actually binned in manufacturing at 1 sun. So they're tested at full current, which means that that's when the module is exhibiting the highest resistive losses. And when the modules are installed in the field, they're operating roughly at about half the current, because most of the day the sun is not normal to the module, and so the modules are not generating 10 amperes. They're probably generating more like 6, 7, 8 amperes. And so what was happening is the modules showed an increase in efficiency in the field. And this is all captured in the pan files that we generate, of course. And then when the industry shifted to half cells, that those gains disappeared, the low light gains. And so all the pan files that we generated received some strong resistance, not just from the module manufacturers, but also from the developers and the EPCs and, you know, and the downstream guys, because they were questioning why modules were showing such a high low light losses. And that was just, you know, an artifact of the technology. And so now the industry is good with that. And same thing for the large, you know, large format of modules. Now, as the cells get larger, they're starting to incur some more resistive losses at high irradiance, which they recover at lower irradiance. And that's a nice boost that the industry will see. But at the same time, you have risks associated with the large size. You know, if you have a module that measures 2 square meters, there's only so much snow you can pile on top of it. There's only so much wind it can resist. You increase the size of that module by 20%, you increase the snow accumulation by 20%, and you increase the wind resistance by 20%. And if at the same time you reduce the frame profile and the frame thickness, bad things are going to happen. And so in previous webinars that we did, we looked into what racking manufacturers were doing to compensate for those risks. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, a module is bad just because it cannot withstand high wind or snow loads. It just means that something has to be done for that module to be reliable and to last 25 years in the field. And what is being done doesn't have to necessarily be done by the module manufacturer themselves. In some cases, they do. It could also be resolved by the industry, by the racking and tracker manufacturers, by extending the rails or adding different mounting points. And so overall, just, you know, to summarize, overall in terms of the thresher findings and the ranking on the PV module index, you know, anything that's green is what we consider excellent. Less than 2% degradation after the full sequences, whether it's, you know, what we call and there's the HF30, TC600, you know, TC600, the H2000, and so when manufacturers achieve less than 2% degradation in all of the sequences, and not just a subset of the sequences, they're automatically considered, you know, high achievers. That's basically the gold standard. And then when they couple that with other indicators, which are performance ranking, as well as quality, internal quality systems and adherence, that is what makes them overall, you know, high achievers, and you know, and we reward them with, you know, with this, you know, with this, you know, ranking, right? The PV module index, you know, top guys. So yeah, so I mean, and you know, speaking of some of the you know, failures that I mentioned earlier with regards to the modules being more likely to break, this is basically what we're doing. And this, you know, this is a variety of different tests that we perform on different mounting methods, and you know, different whether they're on tracker mounts or racking mounts, etc. So to wrap this up, some key takeaways. You know, one thing that you have to realize is it used to take module manufacturers a year or two to come up with a new product because it took roughly 6 to 12 months just to get a substantial increase in cell performance so that they could, you know, whether they're buying the cells from a supplier or they're, you know, manufacturing the cells themselves, the product life cycle used to be much longer. And so they would take, you know, they would release their new products to coincide with major cell improvements so that they don't, you know, introduce a product that's only, you know, 5 watts higher or 10 watts higher. So, you know, the product life cycle used to be long enough. And what that did is it allowed the industry to learn more about the products that they were installing in the field. So when you have a product in the field for 2 years, you have a chance to find out everything that could go wrong. And the module manufacturers themselves had plenty of time to learn from those deployments so that they can introduce and resolve those issues in their next product. Right now, the pace of product introduction is roughly about 6 to 12 months at the most. And so that shortens the learning period. At the same time, the standards development tend to lag usually about 2 to 4 years for a standard to be released, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but it tends to lag. And so the industry cannot wait for a standard to be released before a test is really implemented. So we have to, labs like RETC fill a critical role in bridging that gap, right? Not all products are good out there, but then at the same time, not all products are bad either. One of the key things to note is products that may not necessarily be suitable for a high or extreme weather conditions, say for instance in Texas, could be just fine for for an area like California, for instance, where there's it's known for its temperate environment. And so what we aim to do is not necessarily to say, okay, only buy these products, but to try to facilitate the product deployment so that it can be used in the proper setting. Extreme weather testing is an essential part of the due diligence. This is something that we've always advocated, and it used to be only to look at the durability of modules to ensure they're going to last 25 years. We have to look, and this is something that is really, really important for the stakeholders. We have to look at what will happen in the case of an extreme weather, whether it's high wind, hail events, or high snow risk, right? And then PVMI, and this is an important thing that I have to say, PVMI is not a participation reward index where everyone gets something just by participating. And that's why, like I said, we tested over 300 products. And we're highlighting how amazing a few of them are, but then there are a lot of products that didn't necessarily make it to the top because they didn't meet all the criteria of the index, but they have done amazingly well in specific segments, right? And so a product, for instance, that may not have done very well in damp heat, but has done extremely well in thermal cycling and mechanical stress testing, those products are very well suitable in desert and Southwest environments. So it doesn't necessarily mean that products that haven't made it to the top are not great. They can just be great, but in specific settings. And so, and this is something that, these are some of the qualitative takeaways from the PV module index. And we urge you to reach out to us if you have any additional questions and clarifications. We'll be more than happy to assist you. So and with this, I'll hand it over to the team.
Now, as I was listening to you and Frédéric discuss the testing and the data sets and so forth, it's hard to find another industry that's more reliant upon statistically credible data than the insurance industry, whether you're looking at traditional insurance coverages or the non-traditional, which would be some of the performance covers over long-term. And we'll come back to, we'll address the details of this slide in just a moment. But as we were chatting for the last 35 minutes or so, a lot of the risks, especially the long-term degradation and so forth, a lot of that has to factor with risks that are not typically insured through normal insurance policies, but it's still a risk that's held by the balance sheet. And you have to use the data and sound accounting actuarial principles to understand it, to value it, and then find a proper way to finance it. Maybe you retain it, maybe you go out and try to create some kind of novel solution, which is where I usually step in. But this entire conversation up to this point, we can't wait. We do not have the luxury to wait 2 to 4 years for those testing standards. We need data now that's credible. And the fact that we have Frédéric assuring the integrity of the data set that's being evaluated for overgeneralization. And you and your guys, you have the best job in the world. You get to break the stuff and record breaking it. And then you feed data to us that's statistically credible that we can rely on to make sound risk management and risk finance decisions. So nothing that I do could take place without the work you guys are doing. So first of all, thank you. When we look at this, 2010 to 2017, 18, we had an incredibly, what we would call a soft insurance market. Insurance is just another form of capital. And just like a soft credit market, you could borrow money cheaply and no one asks questions. In a soft insurance market, you could buy a lot of insurance for not much money and no one cares. And It's almost like cash flow underwriting as a term in the industry. And that really worked for carriers for up to about 2017. However, coming out of the Great Recession, there was an anomaly in the ecosystem, and it was long-term interest rates or risk-free interest rate, like the 10-year Treasury, globally were around zero. In the US, they barely made above 200 bips, if it made that high very often. The reason I mentioned that, insurance companies are required by law, they're heavily regulated, to make conservative investments. So they were forced to invest in these instruments that had 0 to 2% returns over 10 years. Really nominal at best, barely cover their carrying costs internally. As that continued to be the ecosystem through the decade, when we get to 17, we start seeing natural catastrophes starting to spike, and we'll see that in my next slide. So now we have a situation where the carriers have no ability to derive investment income, and they're losing money on their bets. Their bets is, I can give you insurance and I'll make money on it. And they started seeing their surplus, their balance sheet starting to shrink. You overlay the fact there's no long-term perspective of interest rates really returning to what we would consider a norm. There was a massive pivot inside the space, a knee-jerk reaction of epic proportion. We have not seen a hard market like this since the mid-1980s, which changed the way pollution insurance is handled and financed since that time. And we're probably going to see the same paradigm shift in the insurance marketplace, whether it's traditional coverages or the more esoteric type coverages. Regardless of the insurance marketplace, the industry is always bifurcated. If you have a better narrative, your story is better, and you're able to attract capital at better terms. You can attract coverage. But when you get into a hard market like we're in now, and it's not disappearing, it becomes exponentially more important to have that superior story, a superior narrative that is supported by objective data. I keep coming back to objective data from Frédéric and Cherif. We use this data, we've been using it for 3 years now, and we've actually outperformed the market very significantly because the carriers, when you present this story with credibility, you're able to attract that capacity. And that's it's been sort of, it seems rather simple, but that's been the hallmark of our practice. When we get into providing 5, 10, 15-year policies that ensure the performance of the solar array that are non-cancelable, being able to rely upon those PAN files and accurate weather data and so forth is critical. And because once you issue a contract that's non-cancelable, you're on it. Whether if it underperforms for 14 years, you lose money for 14 years. So that's that bifurcation is becoming more distinct, and the impact of it is not going to decrease. When we look at the marketplace, we've had 2 years going into 21 of this nightmarishly 20, 30, 40% rate increases in the solar space. And there have been losses in solar that it's somewhat justified if you're not willing to dig into the details. Coming into January this year, we actually had a ray of sunshine. The rate of hardening had slowed down, which is the first sign of stabilization. And then we had, there's some positive feelings in the marketplace. But then I'm going to come back to this little slide here on the screen. And if you will note, July, the second half of the year is horrible for weather and disaster events, weather related, climate related. The first 6 months were fairly benign. If you had the internet version of this, if you added, summarized CPI adjusted all losses in February from 1980 to 2020, they total about $12 billion. And 1 week of February 21, we've incurred about a $25 billion loss to the industry, the freeze in Texas. In March, we had another hailstorm in Texas that hasn't been valued yet. That freeze in Texas, a lot of it could have been avoided if there was proper risk mitigation actions put in place. That 1 week had eradicated that positive momentum we observed in January. So the market is continuing to harden, and actually it's adjusted some forecasts. So, so if you put a spike here, our hopes are now, and I hate the word hope, but all we can do is that the second half of the year performs better than expected. If you get to the next slide. Or let's go back that one, please. I'm sorry. Just to sort of reiterate what happened last year in 2020, this is the number of billion-dollar plus weather climate disaster events in the US. We had 22, which was a record. Total of just under $100 billion in damages. Hurricane Laura, which made landfall as a category 5, fortunately, hit one of the most preferable, no offense to my friends in Louisiana, but that was one of the least populated, at least exposed area in terms of an insurance perspective. That storm had made landfall in Houston. That's a $250 billion number versus the $100 billion we have. So we dodged a bullet, but these storms are continuing to grow in intensity and frequency over, we can't say if the trend's on there a few years now, but there's nothing indicating that it's going to, this frequency and the severity is going to reverse. So how does that integrate with what these guys are doing? If you're developing a solar project right now and you want to go into ERCOT, let's say you're going to North Texas, you know it's going to hail and it's going to be 3 to 4 inches, and you cannot just go out and buy insurance to cover it. Right now in the marketplace, that would be a 5 to 10% of value deductible, 45 to 60 days waiting period after the event before you get loss of income protection. If an event occurred in late May, you have no insurance for a revenue perspective, so almost the 1st of August, which is about 25% of generation during July and June, July. 5 to 10% of the value. When you add those two together, you're at about 150 to 175% of the expected cash flow, 12-month cash flow of the asset. It's not sustainable. And we're finding the investment community, especially tax equity, the more sophisticated investors, are picking up on this. And in addition to looking at the top, how much coverage can you buy, they're focusing on the bottom layer of those losses. So what are the deductibles going to cost me? And if I'm investing in 10 of these assets in Central Texas, what's my potential exposure? And you have to be able to answer that question to the banks if you want to attract their capacity. Forget about the insurance piece. Just to get the capacity, the capital to build a project, you have to have that story. We have been fortunate to work with Cherif and his team to find ways to take a piece of glass sitting out in the middle of a field and make it more resilient. And it should be fairly straightforward and logical, but just tilting the damn thing in a proper angle and make sure it happens has a tremendous impact when you start trying to reduce the losses. However, we're still fighting an insurance industry that's grounded in some statistical modeling that at best is stochastic, and they do not contemplate those unique design aspects that we're talking about. We are engaged in a couple of projects where we're trying to create, or we are going to develop, working with Cherif and some other teams, those secondary risk characteristics, much like Frédéric was talking about, understanding how those more stealthy aspects of risk. We're going to find out how our choices from an equipment perspective minimizes that risk and what the impact from a pure loss perspective is, so that we can overlay that on stochastic modeling and get a more accurate number. We're not trying to sugarcoat a story. We just want an accurate story. And that accurate story resonates with tax equity, resonates with debt, and it's starting to resonate with insurance, especially when we establish the credibility of the data set like we were discussing earlier. But that's more traditional type of coverages, and you get into the performance cover, or even worse, if you're in that North Texas project and you have a hedge in place under the Dodd-Frank rules that were implemented, I think it's last year, your mark-to-market obligation to secure that hedge is incredibly punitive. And mark-to-market could be $9,000 a megawatt times your megawatt AC as security. And if you're unable to produce during that time period, that spike, that's a financial obligation that's not insured, not contemplated in financial models. So, and it's becoming a reality. Just ask the wind guys for the last 2 years, and some of them back in February when their turbines froze. So there's a lot of elements of risk that you're able to gain more comfort around by relying on the data. And if you don't have the data, I know Cherif and Frédéric, ask the questions. They'll find, the feedback loop going back and forth is pretty critical in identifying what kind of data, what kind of forecasting models are needed to satisfy not only the insurance capital providers, but your tax equity, your debt, and sponsor providers.
Thanks, Danny. So we got 5 minutes for Frédéric, and then get the.
Yeah, happy to discuss now. It's fascinating what you're saying, Danny. That we have not seen a harder market since the 1980s. It's really fascinating. I think I want to add to that I think details matter a lot, especially when you're collecting data. Because if you don't pay attention to the details, then data may be fooling you. And I think Cherif mentioned that, for instance, what matters a lot is the way you are when you're doing this test that is illustrated here on this slide, the mechanical test. If you're not using the mounting structure that you will have in the field, well, it's possible that the test is not representative of what you will have in the field. Same for the hail test. If you're testing if your system is equipped with a tow system which put the module in a safer position, then testing at this angle may make a lot of sense. The distribution of the energy of the ice ball hitting the module is different when it's hitting it at an angle whether it's hitting it at a normal incidence. So all these things matter a lot. And the bill of material, of course, we typically say that a product is typically defined as the design, the materials, and the processes. Well, the design, you can test, you can evaluate how a design will go by doing the testing, and for that, the pressure test and the PVMI are very good instrument to evaluate the design. But then you have to make sure that the materials are the same ones. So, bill of materials, verification, and typically our customers, I think something like 80% of our customers are asking us to be 24/7 in the factory when the modules are manufactured. And the processes are also what matters. And just one example of a process that may matter for what we're talking about, the thin glasses are extremely difficult to temper, and that has to do with the fact that tempering is building up a gradient of stress inside the material. So the thinner the material, the more difficult it is to have this gradient of stress. And typically pieces of glass below 2 millimeters, as we very regularly see, it's actually the standard dimension for glass modules. They are not fully tempered. They are sometimes what is called semi-tempered. And yeah, this is a process. If you have all levels of tempering a 2 millimeter glass from almost nothing or nothing to fully tempered, which is almost impossible actually on 2 millimeter glass. So this is a process that directly affects or may affect the outcome of your modules when it's exposed to severe weather.
So Frédéric, process is an interesting word because we can design it and the OEM can build it to the best standards. But if it doesn't tilt before the storm gets there, it's pretty meaningless. So the process, when you're doing your analysis at the job site, the project site, vetting that process of weather prediction, response times, and fail-safes and redundancy in those procedures will also be critical for me convincing insurance carriers that yes, not only do we buy and design the system, but it will work, and so in advance of the event. So the process is a lot of times overlooked.
Absolutely. So, yeah, the evaluation of the processes. We are We see that all the time in manufacturing. You know, we look at SOPs all the time. It's part of our work, but we are asked to do that also for construction management. You know, looking at SOPs as well for O&M procedures and processes. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, thanks everyone. I'd like to just be recognizing time, and of course, this is topic that we could obviously keep going on and on about, but we are right at the top of the hour. So I wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining us, and for our panelists with their sharing their knowledge on everything that we've done, or everything we talked about here today. So real quickly, I'm just gonna jump into some of our solar plus storage topics that we have going on, something that I encourage those out there listening, if you have questions, to reach out to us on. But then I also wanted to make sure that we mention next month's AMA, and we're going to be talking with NABCEP and talking about the upcoming continuing ed conference and just education and certification in general. So I'll leave that there. But Cherif, Danny, and Frédéric, I just want to say thank you a lot. Appreciate your time and your knowledge and sharing your time with us today.
Thank you. And I just want to say something really quickly.
Sure.
I just want to recognize the incredible effort the Mayfield team has put into putting our PVMI together. You guys were instrumental in the collecting the voice of the industry and the content and everything else. And so thank you so much. You guys are a class act. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cherif.
Ditto.
Yes, we'll just leave this slide up as people are, dropping off. If people want to send follow-up questions to our speakers, all of their emails are here. We're also going to send it out in the follow-up email. So please keep an eye out for that and sign up for our July AMA with NABCEP. Thank you, everyone, for joining this roundtable.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.